Have you ever wondered how companies deal with the big, scary unknowns? Things like massive lawsuits, huge product recalls, or major restructuring plans. Basically, those financial time bombs that could go off at any moment. Well, believe it or not, there's a rule book for all that chaos. And today, we're going to demystify it.
So just imagine this for a second. A huge corporation gets slammed with a class action lawsuit. The potential damages could run into the millions, maybe even billions. So the big question is, does this massive potential cost actually show up on their financial statements? The answer, well, it's a little complicated.
But thankfully, accountants aren't just guessing here. It's not the Wild West. There is a specific standard designed to bring some order to this kind of financial uncertainty. It's called International Accounting Standard 37, or IAS 37, and this is the framework that guides companies through these very murky waters. All right, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll talk about the main goal of this whole standard. Then, we'll break down the 3 key ways these uncertainties can be classified. After that, we dive into the all-important 3-point test, then figure out how you even put a price on this stuff, and finally, we'll wrap up with why any of this actually matters to you.
So let's start with the big picture. What is IAS 37 really trying to do? Well, its whole purpose is to make sure that when a company is staring down one of these uncertain situations, they handle it in a way that's consistent and, really importantly, transparent.
And here's the official objective, right from the standard itself. The whole idea is to give people reading the financial statements, investors, analysts, enough solid information to really understand the nature, the timing, and the potential amount of these tricky items. It's all about clarity and making sure we can compare one company to another. Okay, so IAS 37 slices these uncertainties into 3 distinct buckets. And trust me, getting these 3 straight is the foundation for everything else. They are provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets. First up, we have the provision. Now, a provision is defined as a liability where either the timing or the amount is uncertain. But here's the key. It is a liability. Think of it like a confirmed problem. The company already has an obligation because of something that happened in the past, and it's definitely going to cost them money. This is the real deal, so it gets recorded right there on the balance sheet.
Next, there's the contingent liability. And the key word to latch onto here is possible. This is either an obligation that hasn't been fully confirmed yet, or it's a real obligation that, for whatever reason, fails the test to become a provision. Maybe it's not probable they'll have to pay, or they just can't measure it. So this does not go on the balance sheet. Instead, it gets talked about in the footnotes. It's a warning sign.
And then, of course, there's the other side of the coin, the contingent asset. This is a potential economic gain, like a lawsuit the company thinks it might win. Now, accountants are super conservative when it comes to good news. They have this principle of prudence, which basically means you don't count your chickens before they hatch. So, these potential gains are not recognized as assets until that cash inflow is virtually certain, and that's a really high bar to clear.
And here's the most critical distinction, all laid out. A provision, that hits the balance sheet. It directly affects the numbers you see. But a contingent liability, that's more like a warning shot fired in the footnotes of the financial report. Understanding this difference is absolutely essential if you want to read between the lines.
So, this leads to the million-dollar question, right? How do you actually decide? When does something cross the line from being just a contingent liability to a full-blown provision? Well, IAS 37 doesn't leave it up to chance. It gives us a really clear 3-part test to make that call. Think of it like a gateway with 3 locks. To recognize a provision, a company has to unlock all 3. They have to be able to say yes to all 3 questions. If even one of them is a no, it's not a provision. Simple as that.
And here are the 3 locks. First, is there a present obligation because of something that already happened? This could be a legal contract or even what they call a constructive obligation, where the company's past actions have created a valid expectation. Second, is it probable that they'll have to pay up? And third, can they make a reliable estimate of how much it's going to cost? You need 3 yeses to book that provision.
Now that word probable, it's not just a vague feeling. IAS 37 gets very specific. It means more likely than not to occur. And in the world of accounting, that's widely interpreted as having a greater than 50% chance of happening. It's a clear, quantitative threshold. Okay, so let's say a company has gone through the tests and they've got 3 yeses. They have to create a provision. The next huge question is for how much? The standard says it should be the
best estimate of what it'll cost to settle things. And it's right there in those two little words, best estimate, where a lot of professional judgment comes into play.
Now, when you're dealing with a whole bunch of similar items, think about product warranties on thousands of TVs you've sold. You don't try to guess for each individual one. Instead, you look at the entire group and you use a cool statistical trick called expected value to get to that best estimate.
This table breaks it down perfectly. Just look at how it works. You take every possible outcome, so no defects, some minor defects, and some major defects, and you multiply the cost of that outcome by its probability. So for minor defects, there's a 20% chance they'll cost $1 million. You multiply those, and you get an expected value of $200,000. You do that for every scenario.
And then you just add up those expected values from each possible outcome. The $200,000 from the minor defects plus the $200,000 from the major ones, and boom, our total provision is $400,000. That is the best estimate that gets recorded as a liability on the balance sheet.
Okay, we've walked through the definitions, the tests, the calculations, but let's take a step back. Why does any of this really matter? Well, because understanding IAS 37 is like getting a pair of X-ray glasses. It lets you look past the big, shiny numbers and see the potential risks hiding just beneath the surface.
So let's wrap this up with the key takeaways. First, IAS 37 gives us a consistent way to handle uncertainty. Second, and this is the big one, a provision is a real liability on the books, while a contingent liability is just a heads up in the notes. The whole decision comes down to that critical three-point test: obligation, probability, and a reliable estimate. And knowing this stuff is your secret weapon for spotting risks that the headline numbers just don't show you.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. The next time you pick up a company's annual report, you'll know the big numbers on the balance sheet are only half the story. The real drama, the potential landmines, they're often hidden away in the footnotes. And now you know exactly where to look for them.